Welcome back to Call Her Daring, brought to you by Bagnet Company. I'm your host, Kelley Daring. I want to acknowledge that I am not Korean, and the information I'm providing in this podcast comes from research I've done over the past couple of months. My knowledge of South Korean government, culture, and patriarchy is pretty much limited to that research that I did, so I don't want to misrepresent myself as an expert in this field. This episode is meant to be informative and educational, but I do highly recommend doing your own research and listening to the voices and reading the words of the South Korean women who are participating in the 4B movement. There is conflicting information about how large and prevalent the movement is in South Korea. And there are Korean women who claim that the movement is nowhere near as big as it's made out to be by Americans on social media. For these reasons, I will be talking briefly about the history and roots the movement has in South Korea, but my main focus will be on its spread to the US and its proliferation on social media, specifically on TikTok. The 4B movement, which started gaining traction in 2019, is considered a radical feminist movement that originated in South Korea. And this movement renounces dating men, marriage, sex with men, and having children, also known as the 4 no's. It is called 4B because the Korean word for each of these acts starts with B, the Korean word for no. Bihon is no heterosexual marriage. Bichulsan is no childbirth. Biyone is no dating men. And bisexu is no heterosexual sexual relationships. This movement doesn't have a leader and it doesn't have any central organization. And its presence and activism is primarily found online. The movement's online presence functions as an intellectual and contemplative forum, which primarily provides a place for women to vent their frustrations and concerns about existing in a patriarchal, misogynistic society, while also fostering solidarity among those women. This online community has created an open discussion about women envisioning their future without men. Part of the movement's appeal is its anonymity. Many members identify themselves as anonymous women, as a way to remain safe both online and off. Because the 4B movement doesn't have a leader or a central organization, and because it exists almost exclusively online under a shroud of anonymity, it is nearly impossible to determine the size and influence of the movement, or track its intended effects. Some claim there are as many as 90,000, or as few as 5,000 advocates of the movement. But regardless of the numbers, the movement is seen as a way for Korean women to actively challenge gendered pressures in a patriarchal, misogynistic society. Before we get to the spread of the 4B movement and its presence in the United States, it's important to understand the conditions in South Korea that helped spur the 4B movement. In 2016, there was a movement called Escape the Corset, and that movement called for women to liberate themselves from sexual, social, bodily, and psychological oppression. The word corset is used by Korean feminists as a metaphor for the societal mechanisms that bind and repress women, including toxic beauty standards. If you're not familiar with their beauty standards in the Korean beauty industry, South Korea has very narrow beauty standards and strong conformist tendencies. So millions of South Korean women strive to embody societal ideals through extensive skincare and makeup routines, as well as through plastic surgery. It's estimated that 1/3 of young women in South Korea get plastic surgery. And the K-beauty cosmetics market was valued at $99 billion in 2023. For reference, the U.S. cosmetics market was estimated at $63 billion in that same year. The Me Too movement that originated here in the U.S. in 2006 also had a strong influence in the 4B movement. South Korea created their own movement, which encouraged women to come forward about their experiences with sexual harassment and violence. According to Wikipedia, quote, this movement also led to women who were forced into sex work as a result of World War II and the Japanese occupation of Korea to speak out for the first time and in large numbers, unquote. The Korean Me Too movement also focused on issues such as femicide, non-consensual pornography, and misogynistic practices in the workplace. And these are all prominent issues in South Korea. Another contributing factor to 4B comes from South Korea's government pushing more extreme patriarchal rules and pressures. These include South Korean demographic changes, cost of living increases, the rising cost of having children, economic changes, domestic violence, and workplace violence, and the length of South Korea's work week. Their work week is currently capped at 52 hours, and the government unsuccessfully attempted to raise it to 69 hours per week in 2023. There's also been a rise in digital sex crimes in South Korea. In 2018, there were 2,289 reported cases of digital sex crimes. In 2021, the number snowballed to 10,353, and that was the most recent data that I could find on that. In 2015, a study found that nearly 80% of women had been sexually harassed at work in South Korea, and a 2016 survey found the incidence of intimate partner violence at 41.5%, which is significantly higher than the global average of 30% and the U.S. average of 36.5%. Call Her Daring is sponsored by Bagnet Company. Back in 2015, I started Bagnet Company after being fed up using public restrooms with no purse hooks. With the goal of keeping women's purses off of nasty restroom floors, I created Bagnet, the bag magnet, which turned out to be useful in countless other situations, and I sold nearly 1 million since then. What I loved most was that I was making women's lives just a little bit easier, so I dedicated my company to doing just that. I created Perch as a bag hanger for horizontal and non-metal surfaces. I designed the phone sling as a way to tote your phone and a few credit cards, perfect for dog walks, bike rides, and quick runs to the store. My latest creation, the City Sling, is perfect for all-day carrying in a lightweight nylon with a built-in water bottle compartment. Easier, better, more beautiful. It's not a tagline, it's a life mantra. So now that we have a brief history on the origins of the movement, I want to look at the spread of 4B to the US and other countries. I became aware of the 4B movement when videos started popping up on my For You page on TikTok. I don't think that the importance of TikTok can be overstated in the spread of this movement. Women started getting on that app and telling their relationship stories, and they started to realize that they all had similar, if not identical, experiences with the men in their lives. I had never heard of 4B, and on TikTok, I listened to the mostly American women posting these videos as they talked about the tenets of the movement that they were adopting in their own lives and within their relationships with men. In addition to the 4B trend, there is a similar trend popular with Gen Z on TikTok, and that is the boy sober movement. The term boy sober was coined by comedian Hope Woodard, and it involves setting boundaries around relationships in an effort to focus energy on self-care, healing, or reflection. Going boy sober is for anyone abstaining from romantic relationships with people of any gender, not just heterosexual women taking a break from heterosexual men. Hope's rules for going boy sober include no dating apps, no dates, no exes, no situationships, and no sex or only sex without a romantic connection. She says you're not single if someone is taking up your brain space. So while 4B reflects a more permanent shift in the lives of its adherents, going boy sober is generally regarded as a temporary change, typically lasting anywhere from 3 months to a year. If you type 4B movement, or boy sober into TikTok's search bar, you'll find thousands of videos of women talking about their participation in and support of these movements in the US. These women are stating for the world to hear that they are done with patriarchal systems in this country. They're done with men's treatment of them, and they're done with the violence and danger they are subjected to at the hands of men, often their own partners. So they're choosing to not date, marry, or have kids with men. Some women on TikTok are speaking about coming to the realization that men don't like them, and that includes their own partners and husbands. Rather than being with men who don't like them, women are choosing to be single and focus on themselves. To TikTokers like @AshbaBank, This means getting hot, getting a bunch of hobbies, being successful in her chosen career, and writing a book. Under these circumstances, when you invest so heavily in yourself, being alone is so much better than being with someone who hates you. And that's what these TikTokers are talking about. I have seen videos of women acknowledging the pain of coming to terms with the fact that the fairy tales that they've been told their whole life are lies. These women suggest you take time to grieve and mourn the loss of the promised fairy tale and sit with the discomfort and cry. And some even say you're going to have an ego death about this whole thing. I've seen a trend of women committing to platonic life partnerships with other women, where they live with a great female friend or friends, and they have a completely non-sexual lifelong relationship with those friends. They are finding more meaning, connection, and support in these platonic female relationships than they are in relationships with men. American women are participating in the 4B movement because it means they're not being cheated on. They're not being gaslit. They're not dealing with domestic partner violence. They're not doing the majority of the unpaid labor for a partner who doesn't appreciate them. They don't have to act as free cooks or maids or nannies or therapists. And they're not doing all of the emotional labor either. And they're not doing all of the hermeneutic labor. If you don't know what hermeneutic labor is, it is the gendered burden of interpretation in intimate relationships. These women that I'm listening to on TikTok, they don't believe that men bring anything or enough to the table in a relationship. They've realized that men benefit so much more in relationships than women do. And many feel that women give while men take. Other women are tired of fulfilling the stereotypical role of full-time therapist for emotionally distant men. They want a partner who is emotionally open and empathetic, which is the opposite of the masculine ideal. Most of these women are noting that they form friendships with each other that are emotionally intimate. So when they're not dating or marrying men, they still have emotionally supportive relationships. Men typically cannot say the same thing, and women are tired of being the sole source of emotional connection for men. By taking dating, sex, and relationships off the table, women are reporting that they are working through past trauma, strengthening bonds with friends and family, unpacking the thoughts and emotions that have led them to date and marry for validation. They're able to reflect on relationship priorities, reclaim autonomy over their bodies, and spend time and mental space previously lost to men and relationships on more meaningful personal pursuits. The woman who coined the term boy sober, Hope Woodard, she has explained that she's had a lot of sex in her life, but she often said yes because she, quote, was never really given the permission to say no, end quote. Like many women, she was a victim of the false narrative that it was her responsibility to validate men through sex. In a New York Times interview, she said, quote, "I'm a little bit angry at myself and angry at all the sex I've had that I feel like I didn't choose. For the first time ever, I just feel like I have ownership over my own body," end quote. Now, if you do this search on TikTok, if you search 4B, you're going to find videos of American women talking about everything I just summarized, but you're also going to find men talking about the 4B movement. And as expected, some men have responded with comments in videos threatening violence, enslavement of women, and a return to a time where women had little to no rights. One video that received thousands of video responses from women was a man saying, "Some women are just going to have to settle." In their responses, women correctly note that this statement is a projection of men's feelings about being alone. Men don't want to be alone and often feel as though they're settling, so they assume women don't want to be alone and will continue to settle too. Some men have asked women how they find comfort in the single life because they can't find that same level of comfort in the single life. Another common response is men's focus on the male loneliness epidemic. And in this response, they put themselves in the center of a movement that has nothing to do with them or their loneliness. And it highlights their expectation that women continue to prioritize the feelings of men over their own. Yet another response from men has been to feign happiness about the movement, claiming, "Oh, you don't want us? Good. We don't want you either. We didn't want you first." Those are the funniest. However, You will find valuable commentary from men who are supporters of women in these movements. In a really great video, at Doug Weaver Art asks, "Are men necessary?" He says that men have done terrible things throughout history in an attempt to be necessary. He acknowledges that we need women in order for society to function, but that Y chromosomal data shows us that at one point in human history, there were about 17 women to every one man. Clearly, humankind did not cease to exist since we're here today. But if we had 17 men to every one woman, reproduction rates would be low, and the chances of that one woman surviving long enough to reproduce would be really low due to the violence she would likely incur from a portion of those 17 men. He goes on to say that it is well established that women are necessary for the survival of the species and for society to function, but that begs the question, how necessary are men? He says that question makes men feel very self-conscious and leads to them making claims about what men can do that women can't do. He says that men tend to be better at violence than women, so therefore they have to have some reason that society needs violence, which in turn makes men necessary to protect women from violent men. He says that the entire Industrial Revolution was an attempt by men to be necessary. It was a need to create male-dominated industries and then have a society structured to depend on those industries. He says men create the world's problems for which they then become the solution, and it has been this way for generations. He acknowledges that his wife doesn't need him. She has a great job, she makes great money, she has a good support system through her friends and family, and she can hire people to do the things she can't or doesn't want to do. But she wants him in her life, and he says men force society to need them while completely neglecting any attempts to be what society wants. Still, other men note that it's only the terrible men that should be affected by 4B. If you as a man are willing to go to therapy and work on yourself, work on becoming a better human and a better partner, then the 4B movement shouldn't affect you. And there are men that have acknowledged that 4B is the consequence of toxic masculinity and the whole alpha male movement led by the likes of Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson. In an attempt to look at the future of these movements, it can be challenging to predict the lifespan and pervasiveness of movements like 4B and Boy Sober, especially in the realm of social media, where trends seem to change often and it's difficult to gather quantifiable data. However, I do want to examine the potential long-term impact of these movements. Societally, 4B and Boy Sober have the potential to contribute to the evolution of traditional gender roles that is already well underway. More people may question and reject conventional expectations around hetero relationships, marriage, and family life, and more women may prioritize personal autonomy and career aspirations over dating and traditional family structures. Ideally, governments would introduce policies to address the changing dynamics, such as a more robust support system for single individuals, flexible work arrangements, and better childcare options. Economically, we could see a shift in consumer behavior where industries that cater to families and children might see changes, while those targeting single adults and women may grow. This could lead to new products and services targeting single women. As women focus more on their careers, there could be a shift in the labor market with more women in leadership roles and diverse industries. Culturally, we may see more representation of diverse lifestyles, single women, and non-traditional family structures in media and entertainment. New communities and support networks for women who choose not to date, marry, or have children could emerge, providing social support and advocacy. Psychologically, women will likely experience improvements in mental health and well-being as they prioritize self-care and avoid potentially toxic or unfulfilling relationships. To wrap this up, I want to say that it did take me quite a bit of time to research and outline this episode, but I'm so glad that I did. The 4B movement is a radical rethinking of traditional gender roles and relationships, and that's exactly what this podcast is about. Women being radically honest about the female experience. Although we are unable to really quantify the size and influence of 4B in South Korea or the US, Social media platforms like TikTok highlight a growing resonance with women globally. These women are challenging patriarchal systems and reevaluating their roles within them. And they're choosing to focus on personal growth, self-care, and supportive platonic relationships. I want to reiterate that the 4B and Boy Sober movements are not about changing men or seeking their validation, but about women reclaiming autonomy over their lives and bodies. They underscore a broader cultural shift where women are increasingly rejecting traditional expectations and finding empowerment and fulfillment outside of conventional romantic relationships. As these movements continue to evolve, they stand as a powerful testament to the ongoing fight for gender equality and the redefinition of women's roles in society. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Call Her Daring podcast. You can find me and Call Her Daring on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Follow for even more content and conversations about women being radically honest about the female experience. Please join me here every week for a new episode of Call Her Daring, and let's continue the powerful tradition of storytelling with the goal of informing and educating us all, so that we may step into our truest selves and realize our full potential as powerful women.